Now, 4 views on whether and how the PLO and Chairman Arafat make the transition to self-rule. Ambassador Uriel Savir is Director General of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. As the chief Israeli negotiator in last year's secret talks in Oslo, he's had numerous face-to-face talks with Yasser Arafat. In Boston tonight, 2 Palestinian Americans active in Palestinian politics. Bishara Baba is Associate Director of Harvard's Institute for Social and Economic Policy in the Middle East and a member of the Palestinian delegation to the multilateral peace talks. Naseer Aruri is a professor of political science at the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth. And Helena Coban is the author of a book about the Palestinian Liberation Organization and writes frequently about Palestinian politics. In Boston, Mr. Baba, can Yasser Arafat manage the new Palestinian entity?
The short answer to that is yes. I think he is the only Palestinian leader who is capable of managing Palestinian affairs. He's the only one who is certainly capable of having done what he did with the Israelis in terms of signing the Oslo Accord. Admittedly, it's not going to be an easy task, simply because, as you have mentioned, governing is a new phenomenon for Palestinians. There will be errors committed in the meantime and mistakes. But I think that we should learn from our mistakes. We should give Arafat the chance to govern the occupied territories or the liberated territories until there are elections for someone in Arafat's position and other elected officials among Palestinians.
Mr. Aruri, how confident are you that Mr. Arafat can manage this new entity?
Well, I think that probably in the short term, as Mr. Bahbah said, he may be doing it. However, I'm really skeptical about the middle range and about the long term, because after all, we cannot really talk about this without putting it in the context, in the political context. There is an agreement here that was signed a few days ago, and it's questionable whether this agreement has the confidence and the approval, the backing of most of the Palestinian people. In fact, the evidence suggests that there's a great deal of opposition to it, not only the loyal opposition, not only the opposition outside the occupied territories and inside, but also the loyal opposition. And I'm including those people who were involved in the negotiations for 22 months in Washington and others.
Is that an objection to the agreement or an objection to Mr. Arafat?
I think both. Actually, there is some serious objection to the agreement inasmuch as the agreement creates all this web of committees that are euphemistically called joint coordinating committees and so on, which actually are supposed to enable Israel to have a veto over almost any decision that has to be taken by this committee. And at the same time, I think that there is really going to be a conflict of political cultures. I mean, you have the Tunis-based culture there that tends to be bureaucratic, inertia. There's been a good deal of corruption, financial irregularity, and then by contrast, you have a political culture in the occupied territories that's a product of the Intifada, where it is associational, voluntary, pluralistic, with a great deal of concern about human rights.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Coban, what's your view on how well Arafat will do with this situation?
Well, I put my hope mainly in the fact that the Declaration of Principles that was signed in Oslo and that is now going into implementation makes provision for the Palestinians to have elections in July, hopefully not too late, not too much delayed from July. And there is a leadership problem in the PLO, without a doubt. Yasser Arafat is on his own there. His loyal lieutenants, who really were the backbone and strength of the PLO historically, along with him, have unfortunately been killed along the wayside by Israelis, by radical Palestinians, and so on and so forth. So the leadership needs renewing, and I think that the best way to renew it is through a real democratic process there in the occupied territories. Of course, in the short run, there is no alternative to Yasser Arafat.
Mm-hmm. Ambassador Savir, you've dealt directly with Mr. Arafat in the negotiations that brought all this about. What qualities do you see in him that are going to be tested and maybe bring him through or not bring him through in this situation?
I think Arafat went through a very important test. He transformed himself by his own decision from a man of dogma, of violence, to a man of compromise who seeks peace with his neighbors. He is not as popular as he used to be because he's seeking peace and because he's seeking compromise. But I think that the pictures that we saw today of a transition, Israel moving out, Palestinians moving in, is what will give him the support. He had the courage of compromise. I hope he will have the wisdom to run the life of hundreds and thousands of Palestinians who today have new hope, deserve a better life, and it probably will depend on how well it will be run in terms of political pluralism, and I think it was mentioned by all of us, in terms of economic institutions and the money that is going to be absorbed, in terms of the effectiveness and not excessive effectiveness of the police. Israel is going to cooperate if asked for. We're going to give advice only if asked for. It is now up to the Palestinians. We wish them much success.
Mr. Baba, on the point that Helen Coben raised, does Yasser Arafat need elections quickly to give him legitimacy?
I think the PLO is committed to elections in the liberated territories. I don't think that they will be held in July. An announcement was made sometime last week that they will be delayed simply because all the process of the implementation has been delayed. So right now the dates being talked about are in October. He realizes, Chairman Arafat realizes, that democracy is ingrained among Palestinians, and there is no way out of holding elections both on a municipal as well as on a national Palestinian level. I think it remains to be seen, but I'm very confident that it will be held. It's in the interest of Chairman Arafat. It's in the interest of the Palestinian people as well.
Mr. Aruri, Arafat's had trouble getting Palestinians on the ground there to join or to agree to serve on this 24-member governing council. Why is that?
Well, I think that at one level, some of the people in the occupied territories are not really accustomed to his way of doing things. I mean, after all, I watched at the time that they were naming delegates to the negotiations in Madrid, and it seemed that the process was really pretty much ad hoc. And it did not just, follow the rational decision-making processes. I think that there are many people in the West Bank who object to that kind of process. That's number one. But I think that in addition to that, the Palestinians who are going to be participating in this are going to really be asking some serious questions, because after all, this whole endeavor represents a marked departure from the Palestinian consensus. I mean, there was a Palestinian consensus for Madrid, and it did receive the endorsement of the Palestine National Council, the parliament in exile, on which I serve. But since then, we really have not had a consultative process. So I think that that many people in the occupied territories, and perhaps some people outside, are going to be asking some serious questions about this agreement and about the extent to which it really offers them something meaningful. I mean, it is supposed to be limited self-government. It is not autonomy. It is not really limited autonomy.
I saw a quote today in one of the newspaper reports of this refusal. The Los Angeles Times reporting that some of them are saying, look, this is signing a political suicide note to join this council. Explain why.
I think that's quite understandable because I mean, when you look at the agreement, you find that the agreement really does not allow the Palestinians to engage in self-government there, because you have 3 major committees and a good number of subcommittees that are handling civil affairs, that are handling security, that are handling everything that really was being handled by the occupation.
Ms. Coben, did you want to come in on this? I thought I heard you.
Just a moment. I think that some of the symbolism of what is happening right now is really important. When you see the Palestinians flocking out to the streets to see the police people arriving, and just for the people who live in Gaza, after 6 years of living under a curfew every night, a curfew from 8 p.m., that after 6 years, suddenly that is lifted and that is associated with this political move. I think he has the opportunity for a honeymoon, Yasser Arafat. He has to keep the momentum going. And as he goes into this period, there are things that people are going to be asking very serious questions about, in particular, the allocation of funds and who has the decision making. There has to be strict transparency and accountability on all of that. And I know that amongst many of my friends who are Palestinian business people inside and outside the occupied territories, that question is one they're looking at, and that's definitely one that the big aid donors are looking at. So he has to set up an administration that is capable of doing all that. There are plenty of good Palestinian accountants out there, Palestinian business people, people who could set up a financial administration. I just have not seen him yet mobilizing their energies.
What is it about his personal leadership style, Ms. Coban, that brings his ability to do this into question? I mean, for instance, I've seen him accused of being autocratic in the way he runs things and only willing to appoint people whose loyalty is absolutely assured personally to him. Is that correct?
I think that's true. I mean, I've been following the guy's career for 20 years now, and, you know, I have conducted extensive interviews with him, spent a lot of time with him. He has the tendency that perhaps anybody who leads an underground movement inevitably develops to place a high degree of trust in a few people and then to believe that loyalty can be more important, is more important than competence. Well, perhaps if you're running an underground movement and his historic contribution to Palestinian nationalism cannot be underestimated, those kind of qualities are good, but when you move into ruling, into governing, you have to move, as I believe Dr. Bahbah said. Yeah.
Yes, is that Mr. Baba?
Yes, please.
Yes, come in.
I think what we're doing here is we are prejudging Chairman Arafat and the ability of the PLO to govern the liberated territories. I think instead of criticizing every single thing that has been accomplished so far, we should look at how much have we achieved in the past 7 months. I mean, before September, Israel was unwilling publicly to talk to the PLO. Before September, Israel was unwilling to talk about withdrawal from the occupied territories. Before September, there was little hope that there would be peace in the Middle East. Right now, we are seeing the foundation of a Palestinian state. Before prejudging the ability of the PLO to govern, let's give it some time. Let's find out how it goes, at least for the first year.
Bishar, I don't think anybody is prejudging. I think everybody wishes him well.
This is what we're doing right now. We are prejudging what the PLO is capable and not capable of doing.
But there
let's
are
give them
issues,
some time to do it.
There has been a lot of delay. People who had hope in the Declaration of Principles process back in September were promised that it would be in place by January. It's just, limping into place now. There are reasons for that, and part of it is the Palestinian unreadiness. Part of it, I have no doubt, is the kind of the mean-spirited attitude of the Rabin government towards some of these negotiations. But I think that Palestinians, in their own interests, have to ask these questions about how does one govern effectively. I wish them all the best.
Let's ask the Rabin government representative how confident is Israel that this situation which you've now helped to create is going to work?
Well, I think we are fortunate that most Palestinians that we dealt with in negotiations had a little more credit for the Rabin government than Elena Coben just said, talking about ill or bad-spirited. I think there was a lot of credit of the doubt. We don't have to forget what the PLO was, who Yasser Arafat was. We put a line, we're opening a new chapter. Secondly, we have discovered that we have a new neighbor. The Palestinians have discovered they have new neighbors. Enemies are becoming neighbors now. We will have to cooperate. I think that Professor Aruri is wrong. The joint committees are actually an encouragement. We must work together. There are different problems here that must be tackled together. The fact that you'll have joint patrols between Israeli officers and Palestinian policemen is an encouragement in itself. And I agree with the Palestinian gentleman from the multilateral negotiations, who said that we have to give the credit of the doubt and some credit of time. It's not easy to run Gaza. These are new realities for them and for us. But we have embarked on a road that will lead to better coexistence. There's a fundamental change in the PLO. I hope it will color off on the Palestinians. And it's very interesting that the criteria that the Palestinians are putting to Arafat, that encourages us. Our criteria of political pluralism, of economic transparency.
Can I respond to
part of that? Yes. Part of that was seen in the Israeli society, and we do hope that we will see the first Arab democracy living side by side with Israel.
Which gentleman said, can I respond?
Yes, I did.
Mr. Aruri.
Yes, I just want to really disagree with Mr. Xavier on the committees, because you see, this whole arrangement is not really predicated on equality. I mean, here we're looking at South Africa. South Africa knew that apartheid was going to be dismantled, majority rule was going to be upheld. But here, the Palestinians and the Israelis have embarked upon a road that really ratifies the status quo. In other words, the Palestinians are being told that you have to show good behavior. This is an open-ended process. And so when you have these committees and you have 5 Israelis and 5 Palestinians, and it says that the decisions are to be reached by agreement, the meaning of that Israel will have a veto on it.
Well, it's good.
And that is why, you see, this is not really going to end up in democracy.
I understand your point. It's good to come to the States and have a little disagreement, because when sitting with the Palestinians, both in Oslo and in Cairo, we had ultimately disagreements, but we did agree, and it was a Palestinian agreement. Look at the economic issue. We do have a joint committee. Why? Because we have joint economic interests. We have joint security interests. And we do, I think that if you look at Arafat and the credit that he gets in the world today, you'll probably have more Israelis giving Arafat the credit of the doubt, giving the PLO the credit of the doubt, than many Palestinians or many Americans and many Europeans.
You're nodding your head, Ms. Coban, is that right?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, well, everybody maybe at this stage has an interest in Arafat succeeding, but I think maybe there's more criticism of him amongst Palestinians than there is amongst Israelis.
Well, isn't that a good reflection of Palestinian democracy that we're so concerned about? I mean, the fact that Palestinians have said no to joining the Palestine National Authority is a very good indication that Palestinians are free. And I think if that is to be an indication of what is to come, Arafat is going to have a tough time governing as an authoritarian figure. He's going to have to share power.
I hope he listens to the reservations that people express when they say they can't join the authority right now, and I hope he develops some of those listening skills and some of those skills of mobilizing people's energies, because they need it to succeed.
I'd love to go on with this, but that is our time. Ms. Coban, Mr. Aruri, Mr. Baba, Ambassador Xavier, thank you.